Hello and good morning, all of you. Friends, we are discussing this course, British Poetry, in this class. We have successfully completed 5 units. The last text which we discussed was Paradise Lost. And today, in Unit 6, we are starting a new text written by a very famous neoclassical writer. And the writer's name is Alexander Pope. He was the master of heroic couplets and mock epics. Mock epic is an epic written form, kind of, let's say, mockery. A poem which is written in the epic style, but want to mock on the social aspects. It can be a social satire, it can be a personal satire as well. And we, in this mock epic, Rape of the Lock, are going to discuss the various aspects of this satirical form in this lecture. Friends, in this 30 minutes lecture, we will be discussing about the general plot and setting of Rape of the Lock, and we would be able to locate Pope as a 18th century satirist. How he was the pioneer of his age, most popular figure. The age neoclassical is also named as the age of Pope. So, what are you going to learn from this 30 minutes lecture? What will be the lecture outcome? First, you would be able to extract the plot and setting of Rape of the Lock. On the other hand, you would also be able to appreciate Pope's role as a central 18th century satirist. So, now, after knowing that what we are going to learn from this lecture, let us come to the content and discussion of this book, Rape of the Lock. First, let us talk about the concept of the story behind the story. The story behind the story means from where this concept is taken, from where this story begins, how Alexander Pope is locating specific people of his society through this satire, Rape of the Lock. Pope wrote the Rape of the Lock in response to a request made by his friend John Carlyle, a prominent Roman Catholic of the time. Friends, Alexander Pope has very limited friends, and John Carlyle was one of them. He was a Roman Catholic, and he motivated Alexander Pope to write this story. Carlyle explained that his friend Lord Petre had cut off a lock of Arabella Farmer's hair. Friends, we have the real life characters, Lord Petre and Arabella Farmer, who are, let's say, converted into fictional characters in this book, Rape of the Lock. So, Carlyle is trying to, let's say, explain the very trivial incident of cutting the lock. What is a lock? The rolled hair in the head of Arabella Farmer. She is a lady and a very fashionable lady. So her lock was cut by Lord Petre, and this is the basic of this story. Ever since the incident, the families had been feuding. In order to make light of the situation, Pope wrote the Lap of the Lock. Friends, this is a very trivial incident but created a mess between the two families. And after this incident, this, let's say, the family conflict became a mode of general chat, gossip for the common people of London, and which motivated Pope to write on this incident. The stealing of Miss Belle Fermer's hair was taken too seriously and caused an estrangement between the two families, though they had lived so long in great friendship before. So, friends, it was a trivial incident but taken very seriously by the families and thereafter by the British society. A common acquaintance and well-wisher to both desired me to write a poem to make a jest of it and laugh them together again. It was with this view that I wrote The Rape of the Lock. Friends, this is a quotation statement given by Alexander Pope himself. He says that a common acquaintance and well-wisher, a person whom we had already named in the earlier slide, he suggested to write a poem on this trivial incident to laugh, and which is why Alexander Pope wrote this poem, Rape of the Lock. Let us now talk about, after let's say story behind the story, let us now talk about the plot summary. What have you seen? How the plot begins of this mock epic and how the plot ends. Poet begins with an overview of the problem at hand. A baron has committed a terrible offense against a young lady, but we do not yet know what this offense is. So, there is a baron in this story, in this poem, who decides to take a terrible offense against a young lady, but in the beginning we do not know what it is going to be. A sylph or a spirit named Ariel warns a young woman named Belinda that an offense will be committed against her, but she does not include where or when. Friends, in this story, we have few supernatural characters. Their roles and their divisions will be discussed in the coming classes, in the coming slides and PPTs. But for now, you have to know only that they are considered as sylphs, and Ariel is one of them. You can call them as guardian angels of Belinda. They came to hear about this news that Belinda's hair are in danger. Belinda's beautiful locks are in danger. And they warn Belinda, but they are not able to give the complete information, where or when or by which person this incident is going to happen or this action is going to be committed. Belinda, clearly a woman from high social standings, prepares herself for a social event by putting on makeup and generally just dolling herself up. Friends, when we look at Belinda, what is she doing in the beginning of the story? She is preparing for a party, and with all her, let's say, makeup kits and etc. She is preparing for that social event, dolling herself up, getting prepared like a doll. She travels to where the social event is being held and is thought to be more beautiful than anyone else. Her hair, specially, is always the object to envy. Friends, when we talk about, let's say, Belinda, we see that she is thought to be more beautiful than anyone else. Why? Because of her hair. Many people envy from her beautiful hair, and which is why she is proud of them. A baron who especially admires Belinda's beautiful golden locks of hair has decided to attempt to cut off a lock of her hair, as it would be the finest treasure he could hope to have. Friends, when the story progresses, we see that there is a baron who is admirer of the beauty of Belinda and her beautiful locks of hair. But he decides to cut them off and try to, let's say, keep them with him as a finest treasure he could hope to have. Maybe he feels jealous of Belinda's beauty and he thinks that he can never get Belinda as his, let's say, wife or as his beloved, which is why he decides to cut off the hair of Belinda. He so badly wanted this lock that he even prayed to the gods and lit an altar fire. The ridiculousness of this behavior for just a piece of hair is a good example of the satire that Pope employs. Friends, just like in an epic, the hero or the protagonist tries to invoke any god, tries to praise that god, to give that person strength to complete that Herculean task. In the same manner, this person, baron, prays in front of a god. A kind of ridiculousness is shown in that scene. A kind of satire is shown in that scene. Everyone plays a card game called Ombre, and although it seems clear that the baron will win, Belinda does not give up hope. So, then the story progresses to the game of Ombre. These people are so free, although they behave like they are always busy. But they spend a lot of time on playing Ombre game. This game is described as an almost life or death situation. Pope makes the card game seem like an important battle, and by doing so, he is in effect mocking high society for equating a card game to war. Friends, these people are not, let's say, the real life people. They do not have their any action to perform. But when they are playing this Ombre game, as all of you know that in card game we have kings, queens, etc. and they fight with each other in the game. But Pope describes this game of Ombre like the real armies are doing battle with each other in this card game, which is again a very mocking situation. The game ends and Belinda wins. Clarissa fetches a pair of scissors for the baron to cut Belinda's hair. The baron cuts the lock from Belinda's hair and she becomes infuriated. Friends, we see that in the story, when the Ombre game ends, Belinda wins, and there is a servant, Clarissa, who gives scissors to Baron. Baron cuts the lock of Belinda, and Belinda becomes mad, furious in this situation. Umbriel, a gnome, travels down to the underworld to get Belinda a bag of sighs and a veil of tears. The gifts were brought to comfort Belinda. Then, friends, as happens in the epic poetry, there is again a supernatural character, gnome. The gnome travels to the underworld. There a goddess lives, and from where gnome brings, let's say, a bag of sighs and a veil of tears, and gifts that to Belinda so that she can cry and show her emotions to the society, to the people there. Maybe this is a symbolic situation suggesting that Belinda is not at all emotional in her life, and the emotions are gifted from outside, the tears, the sighs are gifted from outside, and only after that she is able to show her, let's say, critical feelings. Clarissa tries to calm Belinda down, but it does not work. Belinda throws a handful of snuff at the Baron and a battle begins. The battle ends and the lock of hair is nowhere to be found. Friends, then the battle between Belinda and Baron begins. You may think that battle means they are going to fight with the swords or guns, but this is not the case. Belinda throws the snuff towards Baron. As all of you know, that snuff is a kind of, let's say, tobacco powder, which they used to consume through their nose. So snuff is something which is not going to harm anyone. But Belinda throws that snuff in front of Baron. She has nothing else to, let's say, give to Baron. And this is how their, let's say, mocking fight, which is shown very seriously by Alexander Pope, ends without getting the lock from Baron. So, the lock are nowhere found in the end of the story, but they become the star in the sky, suggesting, let's say, a pair of hairs as a very much importance by Alexander Pope. Although they were nothing, when the hair are cut from the body of human being, they are useless, nothing. But they are treated as a very precious possession of Belinda in the story of this poem, Rape of the Lock. Let us move to the next aspect after the brief background of Rape of the Lock. That is Pope's role as a central 18th century satirist. In this we are going to discuss that what are the techniques used by Pope of satire, how he became the most popular figure, the central figure of 18th century. So let us discuss about them. The 18th century was one in which exaltations of wit and reason came to the forefront of literature, in the form of both Horatian and Juvenalian satires, which through keen observation and sharp nimbleness of thought exposed the superficial follies and moral corruption of society during the neoclassical period in Britain. Friends, when we talk about the age of Pope, we see that there is, let's say, Horatian form of writing or juvenile satires, which were very popular. In these satires, there was a keen observation, and through that keen observation, the trivial things are considered as, let's say, great things. Underneath the Enlightenment, ideals of rationality, order, and knowledge, society embraced a pervasive obsession with decorum, a facade of established traditions and vanities, as well as an innate sense of moral and political supremacy. So, Behind, let's say, these scenes, the political satires are produced in the age. Satires during this period aim to point out the shortcomings of society through ridiculing accepted as standards of thought, exposing Britain's flaws, and chastising the hypocrisy of the time. Friends, just the work of satire is to expose the society, the problems of the society, the hypocrisy of the common people. This was done at a mass level in the age of Pope. Enlightenment writers Alexander Pope and Jonathan Swift use different mediums of satire, different types of logic, and different targets of ridicule in order to shine a light on separate aspects of British society, providing much needed criticism of the profuse moral corruption of the society that sometimes seemed to forget the true ideals of his age. So friends, when we talk about the writers like Alexander Pope and Swift, we find that they used a very different kind of logic, and much, let's say, criticism showing the moral corruption is created through these writers. Pope, in his The Rape of the Lock, is Horatian in tone, delicately chiding society in a sly but polished voice by holding up a mirror to the follies and vanities of the upper class. So, that is what Pope is doing in this satire. Pope does not actively attack the self-important pomp of the British aristocracy, but rather presents it in such a way that gives the reader a new perspective from which to easily view the actions in a story as foolish and ridiculous. Friends, Pope has created many stories to, let's say, criticize the British aristocracy. The kind of foolishness and ridiculousness which existed in the society. Pope was a master of reflecting all these things. A gentle mockery of the upper class, more delicate and lyrical than his brutal counterpart, Pope nonetheless is able to effectively illuminate the moral degradation of the society to the public. The Rape of the Lock assimilates the masterful qualities of heroic epic, yet is applied satirically to the seemingly petty, egotistically elitist quarrel, which is shown in this book, Rape of the Lock, as well. These are, let's say, egoist peoples. These are elite people, and their quarrel is also elite, shown in a mocking manner in this poem, Rape of the Lock. During this time of literary prosper, epic poems such as John Milton's Paradise Lost were held in high regard due to their significant subject matter, compelling heroes, and rich text. Friends, we had earlier also discussed a poem, Paradise Lost, which was an epic. And when we compare that poem with this mock epic, Rape of the Lock, we see many differences, but the similarities of epic writing in these poems. Pope follows this grand form in Rape of the Lock, ultimately achieving the whimsical mock epic through his milieu of trifling and timeless. Despite the likeness to historical epic pieces, this work displays a light and playful tone, which illuminates the idiosyncratic nature of poems' central conflict, the Baron stealing or the raping Belinda's illustrious lock of hair. The meeting point, the sacred hair, disever from the fair head, forever and forever, then flashed a living lightning from her eyes, and a scream of horror rent the affrighted skies. So this is a line from the poem Rape of the Lock, suggesting that the Belinda is very angry and she doesn't know what she is going to do in this situation. This embellishment and exaggerated quotation is representative of the fundamental elements of Horatian satire in this mock epic. Personification is employed to place emphasis on the seemingly transient effects of Belinda's terror as her screams rend the affrighted skies. So, friends, there is a hyperbole which is everywhere in the poem. Belinda is screaming, and it seems that the sky will fall down from her screams, which is something that is not possible. As read, this example makes a mockery of the traditional epic, suggesting that the removal of Belinda's lock has detrimental and almost divine implications, which is actually not true. Why, let's say, gods or divine powers will be affected by just cutting the lock of a lady? Pope uses personification extensively throughout to add to the heroic coloring of the poem and, in general, elevating the subject matter. Pope fashioned the characters of Belinda and the Baron as representations of Arabella Fermor and Lord Petre, Catholic British aristocrats who possessed an infatuation with decorum during the neoclassical periods. Friends, when we talk about the characters like Belinda and Baron, which are represented by Arabella Fermor and Lord Petre, we see that the British aristocracy, which was governed by the Roman Catholics, were, let's say, had become corrupt in the society. The decorum is maintained in the neoclassical period, but it was, let's say, very hollow from inside. These characters represent the facsimile of 18th century British personal ideals and thus take a role of pseudo-heroes in Rape of the Lock. Friends, we had seen that these are not actual heroes but pseudo-heroes. They are not real, but they are hollow from inside. They are not, let's say, strong but weak. Pope uses his elaborate mock epic to serve as a metaphor for the vain and superficial period in British history. The poem was intended to grasp the attention of aristocrats and society in general, compelling them to humorously realize their shortcomings and spark a cultural shift. Friends, when we talk about this poem, this mock epic, we see that there is a, let's say, extended metaphor which is extremely vain and superficial portrait of British history, suggesting that British history was hollow, it had become corrupt. Poet wanted to represent the real picture of aristocrats and society in general. And these are the realities which compelled the humorous realization which Pope has portrayed in this, let's say, book, Rape of the Lock. I hope that you have now understood that this book, Rape of the Lock, had made Pope as one of the most famous figures of neoclassical age. The poetic craftsmanship which he has, the portrait of the characters, the way he creates this mock epic is something which is extremely different from the other forms of writings of the age. That is all for today. Thank you for listening.